turns your heart around, and next thing you know, you're closing down the town. Best that you can do, best that you can do is fall in love.
Good evening. I'm Jill Martin, and this is Worth the Price of Admission. Last week, my guest was columnist Kernan, who has been in the business of writing sports for over 45 years, a great historian. He has written for the New York Post, the San Diego Union Tribune. He now writes for ball9.com, and he has a podcast, Real Voices of the Game. We had such a great time last week, but we needed more time to talk, so I asked him to join me once again.
Bye, last That time was very interesting, and I gotta say, I love your enthusiasm for whatever subject you're dealing with, and I think you'll do really well in this.
Well, thank you. It's really been fun the last 6 months. I've met so many people and learned so many things, a lot about this.
A lot about this, yeah.
So, Kevin, what do you think of journalism today?
I think it's there's two levels. I think it needs to get back to more. That's a great question, because nobody's talking about it. It needs to get back to, and not just in sports, but it needs to get back to serving the reader, or listening to the podcast, or watching a show. It's too much of journalism today serves, and I can't think of a better word for it, but it serves the elites. And whether that's be the GMs in baseball, the people in charge, Rob Manfred, and there's nothing wrong with that. You need to have those connections. I did it for many years. You have to build those bridges, but you have to be honest with yourself and your readers. And in the end, that's what made me so successful with athletes, because they knew. I'll tell you one quick story, and I just thought of it because you brought it up. And again, it's a basketball story, but it happened in baseball too. I wrote a story about Latrell Sprewell and what his agent said, and it really irritated the Knicks. The next day, Latrell Sprewell was fined $35,000, and that was a big number back then. And he was fined $35,000 for what his agent said in a column that I wrote for the New York Post at the time. Well, they all went in there in the group, and as a reporter, you got to show up the next day, Jill. That's very important. Had to show up in Billy's office, had to show up here, had to show up there. So I had to show up the next day after that happened to Latrell. And we all know about Latrell. he could go off, he could fly off the handle a little bit, but I had a good relationship with him. And one of the other writers said, Latrell, what's your reaction to that story where, you got fined $35,000? Are you upset? He goes, and I'll always remember this. He said, if Kevin Kernan wrote it, it's true. So that's what my agent said. I'll pay the $35,000. That's I'm basically, that's what he said in so many words. So if you write the truth, you're okay. And I think journalism, especially sports journalism, has got to get back to that. It's also got to get away from numbers, Jill. Numbers are big, but I can't stand watching a game. One of the things I love watching a game when Billy was a manager was the stories from the Phil Rizzutos, everybody right on down the line, everybody that was there in the booth, because they talk to the players. Now you get too much of, he's throwing his slider 83% of the time against righties, with a 2-0 count. Okay, you can just tell me he throws his slider a lot. You don't have to tell me. Give me stories about what makes these players tick, who's hot, who's not, what's going on, what changes they've made. What's going on in their life, maybe something's going on in their life. So all that, unfortunately, has been cast aside, and we need to get back to that. And the writers that do that now, or the broadcasters, those are the ones who are super successful. Just think of, and again, you're doing podcasting now. Joe Rogan is probably the most successful podcaster because he gets honest human answers out of his subjects, and that's what it's all about. Same thing as a writer. You've got to get back to that. So I think it's a long-winded answer, but I think journalism needs to do a better job about being journalists and not just selling whatever somebody's trying to sell.
And plus the right questions.
Yes.
And I really find that many times you wish that someone would ask something And I know that our world has taken a different turn, but you still need to ask those questions because you still need to bring your people in who want to listen to it and who want to hear about something that they knew something about way back then or today. So I'm grateful to be part of it. I've got a stat for you, though.
Okay.
A friend of mine a couple of weeks ago gave this to me, and I'd never seen it. And there it is on the screen. It's the stats of the most home runs by the Yankees against the Dodgers. And look at this group of men. I was just like elated, going, "Look at this!" What do you think?
I was shocked when I first saw it, but then I thought about it for a second, and I said, no, because Billy was a big-time player, and of course he faced the one other thing that stat could say is those were World Series home runs, Jill. Those weren't just home runs in July in a series that
they were there when they counted.
When it's super counted, and I knew Billy's numbers were terrific in the postseason, but I think he had something like that. And again, here's a number: 979 OPS for a second baseman. I'll take that any day of the week. And he also had, I believe, 3 triples in the World Series, and his World Series came against the Dodgers a lot. So all that makes sense. But if you show up in October, Mr. October got his nickname for that. And Billy was considered. And I think that a lot of that, and that's such a great point, because a lot of people forget how good a player Billy was. And he was I want to throw a word out there and see if you agree or not. He was a great teammate, but he also was a disruptor. And he would get on base. He'd get the pitcher thinking about him and trying to steal a base. And all of a sudden the hitter gets a fastball because the pitcher doesn't want to throw a breaking ball. He'll get under his skin. He'll make a play. Defensively, we've all seen the highlights, some of the plays he made. Fearless. So that's a great stat. I got to use that in one of my Ball 9 columns because it's so terrific. And it says so much about Billy as a player with 5 home runs, and Mickey, of course, had 9, most against the Dodgers. But Billy's right there with Aaron Judge, and I know.
Look at that. I mean, if they'd never played the Dodgers again in the World Series, Billy's name is right there with the Judge.
Yeah, and what's great about that too is when I would come across numbers like that, or my friends at I used them recently because I was doing a story on the Mets, Elias Sports Bureau. Great people. They work their tail off and they help writers out. And I always give them credit. That's another thing about journalists. If you read something somewhere or somebody gives you information, give them a plug. They deserve it. So two weeks ago, I was doing something on the Mets, and might have been a little bit longer. I was a little bit ahead of the curve because I could see where the Mets were heading and some issues. So I was thinking
about that when you're done. What's going on with them?
Yeah. Well, okay. But this stat, I said, I think they haven't come back much this year. So I called Elias. I identified myself as a BBWAA member. That's a Baseball Writers Association of America. And they've always helped me through the years. And I said, hey, how many times have the Mets come back after the 7th inning to win a game this year? And they got back to me within 20 minutes with an email. You know what the number was? 0-30. Their record was 0-30. So that's, again, you think of something as a journalist, you back it up with numbers, and then all of a sudden you have something really, really important, because last year they came back on games.
But you have passion for being a historian, which makes you who you are, Kevin, that's why it's such a pleasure to talk. I mean, I'm learning so much, and it's really fun. So briefly, what's going on with the Mets and the Yankees?
Yeah, briefly with the Mets, I think there's 2 things going on. They've relied too much on analytics. It's taken the heart and soul out of the team. It's a game where the blood pumps through your system, and the Mets have players like that. Tommy Pham, and I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but Buck had told Tommy that he had to sit 2 of the next 6 games, or 4 of the next 6. I forget the exact number, because the analytics department had decided he was not hitting well against these pitchers they were facing. And Tommy Pham was upset, and he's taken off since then. So you can't just look at the history. What's going on with the Mets is they've kind of lost their mojo a little bit. Diaz injury killed them, of course, but Billy Epler didn't make the adjustments that he needed to make to bring in people to kind of bridge that gap of losing your closer. And the bullpen's a little short. Starting pitching has been short. I think they kind of, I hate to say it, but they rested on their laurels. And I also think, and I can't prove this, so this is just me guessing, I think they took Buck Showalter too much out of the equation. Buck is one of those managers who's more like Billy, who wants to be
Yes,
involved, but
Uh-huh.
and he defends his players, but he also demands. And I noticed it in spring training. I was there a few days, and we had a great conversation. I talked that day to Buck and Dusty Baker, and wrote a column about both those guys because they were at the ballpark the same day, about going with the heart and soul. But I also noticed that this is weird, Jill, but they have a load management thing now with these teams where they don't want players to work too much, as crazy as that sounds. So they've cut back on infield and outfield and all the little things. For example, Mets lost a game the other day because 2 pop-ups dropped in. That can't happen. That can't happen. On the same day, Ellie De La Cruz, the great rookie, I wrote about him this weekend in my Ball 9 column called Plastics. And he made a catch down the left field line from shortstop that was phenomenal. So when you make those plays, your whole team lifts up. Ellie De La Cruz scored from first base, believe it or not, in the minor leagues, and a chopper single to third base. So I don't want to go into the whole thing. Let people Google it and look it up. Well, the Mets have lost all that. They don't have that hustle. Lindor he thinks he's a $341 million home run hitter. He's not. He needs to be a guy who puts the ball in play, be a disruptor. So they lost their identity of who they are. I don't think they worked hard enough because of upper management wanting them to cut back on their workload. And they also, I think they made some poor decisions with, they got unathletic. And that's another thing I wrote about this week, the importance of athleticism in baseball. I think the Mets lost their athleticism.
And, I don't know how well the analytics would have gone in our home. I kind of think about that a little bit. Like, nah, I don't know. And about the rule changes. I mean, we talked a little bit about the size of the bases when you were here with me before. The time clock, the shift. I mean, I think Billy would have had a really fun time with the shift too. He moved everybody over, but the time clock. I asked my friend Mike Pagliarulo what he thought about all of that, and I said, say you're like, ninth inning, seventh game of the World Series, and everybody's moving around a little bit, and so a pitcher, he's working it, and so what if he all of a sudden wants to just like wipe his brow and he's gone over the clock? Do you call it and that's the end of it? I mean, isn't there some kind of discretion that's made there? And I also know that what I've learned to understand is that in the minor leagues, those time elements are different than what they are in the majors. Talk about
I'm sure Pags had a great answer for you because Pags is one of the best. Pags was, you see over my shoulder, I have the New York State Baseball Hall of Fame. I was inducted to that a few years ago in the group with Mike Pagliarulo, and he's a great talker. He'll be great on your show as well. And there we go, magic. And but they don't. The guys that are making the rules don't understand baseball, so they don't understand.
That's exactly what he told me.
Okay, and we didn't.
That's what he told me.
This is just us.
Words. That's what he told me.
They don't know baseball. They putting down numbers. Jim Cott told me a story similar to that about how he ran into somebody in a big shot in baseball, and he basically called them out on it. And so they're trying to do things to create offense instead of organically offense being coming. And it's interesting, Jill. The strikeouts are high, or maybe higher than ever, even with all that open space with the shifts, because guys aren't taking advantage. Luis Arraez, he's hitting close to 400 for the Marlins. He was the guy who I told people 2 years ago was the closest thing I've seen to Tony Gwynn. He uses the whole field. Players don't use the whole field like they used to do. So there's so much you can do with the new numbers. And again, back to Ellie De La Cruz, you know what? Hustle everything out of the box. You'll get doubles. You'll get triples. You'll steal bases. And I think the game itself, I think they mean well by trying to get offense back, but you can't take shortcuts. And here's the other thing. Pitchers always could have worked faster if they wanted to. And getting back to the World Series or playoffs, I can just imagine the way it works, because there's a guy up in the press box that works for the league that pushes the buttons where the timing device goes. And if there is a penalty, it buzzes on the umpire. So the umpire he has to call it. He's got nowhere else to go.
He doesn't
Could
have
you
anywhere else to
imagine
go.
any game in the postseason being decided with a guy having 2 strikes, taking his breath, looking at his bat to try to get it together? I'm not talking about no more Garcia Parra thing, which we kind of liked back then. It was a little too much, but we get it. And all of a sudden he takes a second breath and he's not in the box at 8 seconds engaging the pitcher, and all of a sudden he strikes out because of that. Bad thing. Bad rules. The heart of the rules were made right, but they shouldn't be so. There's got to be gray area for letting it be baseball. That's the best way I can put it.
So who do you think was the greatest Yankee overall player?
Look, you're talking to someone who's a Mickey Mantle guy, and
Okay.
I'll always go with Mickey Mantle simply because
He was the best man at my wedding.
that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I didn't know that. And this is one of the things I love about covering the Yankees, because before Mickey passed, obviously, I met him a bunch of times here and there, and that history that they brought back, and the Goose Gossages of the world, the Hall of Famers. But Mickey, to me, I thought he was the greatest because not only was he carrying the Yankees on his shoulder emotionally, but he had to battle through so much to get to where he had to go. And I used to love talking to Alex. Alex Rodriguez you can get on Alex for a lot of reasons, but he loves the history of baseball, and he loves baseball, and he understands baseball than most people. He would be a great baseball owner or front office guy because he really gets the game. And we would talk about that, the old players like that and things like that. And to me, Mickey, first of all, the name, Mickey Mantle. I mean, it's, and I grew up.
That, yes.
I was born in 53. So, I remember how hard he had to work to get that 500th home run, and how the players had respect for him, and how he put his head down and just run around the bases. And I don't know this because I wasn't covering him as a player, but he also seems to be like a kind of guy that you would probably sometimes run into and have a little argument with or discussion with, but he'd probably be really nice about it in the end. And my friend Jean Fruth, I don't know if you're familiar with her. You should.
Yes, she was on my show. She's an amazing photographer.
And Jeff Idelson, we had him on our show as well. And Jean has that. I don't know if you saw that picture, but she lined up, and this is how I like to bring things from history to public to now. She was out in Oklahoma, took Mickey's high school, his high school team, lined him up in front of his house, and I've been to
Commerce,
that house.
Oklahoma.
Yeah, Commerce, Oklahoma. I've been to that house. I've seen the tin, the barn next door where he learned to switch hit with his grandfather pitching to him, and she made a wonderful picture of those guys, that whole team just strung along. And the funny thing, I don't know if she told you, but when she made that picture, Jeff Idelson, the former president of the Hall of Fame, who's a big Yankee fan as well. Well, Jeff was like her go-to guy who helped on everything. He went out to the local Home Depot to buy a ladder, and this is how her mind works. So he got a huge ladder that she was able to climb up and get that great shot. So Mickey,
a hard worker.
Yeah, Mickey is. Mickey's still around in different ways.
Yes, he is. And so, would you say that about him being the best Yankee in a clutch too, or somebody else?
I still think I'll take them all along. I'm just for Mickey. Like Reggie was great for what Reggie did too. You got to think of, when you're talking about clutch Yankees, got to talk about Reggie. And Reggie and I have had many great discussions through the years. And I love Reggie's passion. That's all I can say. And we all know with Billy and Reggie what it was all about and stuff like that. But let's face it, Billy made Reggie a clutch player. Billy made Reggie a better player. And in his heart of hearts, Reggie has to understand that. Just like he understands, when he made the comment about Sturman, the straw that stood, he's the straw.
Yes. Uh-huh. Boy, did that light an oil fire, huh?
Oh, yeah. And you know what? And you know what? They could have buried him within that organization, but they gave him a second chance, and he did his thing. And I think as time goes on, Reggie's always going to be special to a lot of Yankee fans. But to me, I'm going Mickey. And of course, the other guy, we never give him credit, and he deserves it more than anything. Yogi Berra. What a great player he was.
Yes.
Great player.
What amazing. And
he could hit anything. And he was so smart in his baseball decisions. And here's the other thing, Joan, and this kind of goes back to the column I wrote this week. Yogi was a tremendous athlete, too.
Yes.
Just like Billy was a tremendous. Those Yankees from that era, what did they have in common besides the pinstripes? Athletes. And I think you asked me earlier about the Yankees, and I kind of lost my train of thought, but that's what's gone on with the Yankees. They've lost their athleticism to a great degree. Judge is athletic. And
you think he's going to be back for the season?
I think it's going to be tough. I don't know exactly when that will heal, but being a big right-handed hitter, that back toe means a lot. And I had this funny conversation with Judge a few years ago, 2020, early March. He taps me on the shoulder, and this is when he had the shoulder problem. And we had, Judge and I had a great relationship, like as I told you last show. And he told me what his real injury was, and before he told anybody. And we talked that day, and he had hurt that shoulder diving against the Angels in a 9-0 game, if I remember. And I told him, I said, listen, you're too big, you're too strong. You have to stop diving. You have to, in games where you're winning 9-0, you have to stop running into walls because he had hurt his shoulder a couple years earlier and was out and had surgery. So I said, I understand the emotion of the moment, but you can't run into walls. And lo and behold, what happened this year? He made that great catch. He was all excited because it was the Dodgers. Back to what we were talking about. He's all excited because he's, Mookie Betts and all that stuff. And he hits that little part of the wall. And there we go. I think it's going to be a tough injury to come back from this year. I think he will. And I think he'll eventually figure out hitting because he's such a good hitter. And maybe he won't have the same power. Maybe he'll have to be a different kind of hitter. But the problem is, Jill, and I dealt with this with the NFL as well, with a turf toe. If you can't run, you can't be effective. So I think it's going to be tough for him. And my advice to him back in 2020 still holds. Stop running into walls. You're too good. If this double falls through, it falls through. You got to be smart about it.
So tell me about your podcast, the Voices of the Game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always wanted to do this. And I wanted to do, just like you're doing, real voices of the game. So Dave D'Agostino put it together. He's like the producer, co-host, and we have people on, and we get unbelievable stuff from them. And we have any level. You can be a star. We've you could be a GM. You could be a guy who writes books for softball girls. You could be talk about history. We had this guy named Len Furman on who does a history thing every day where he goes back in time 50 years to the day and looks up stuff and continues to tell the stories if it just happened now. So we started doing that, and we think it's successful, and we got I think we have 20,000 subscribers in 72 countries. We also teach the game. We have great instructors on, pitching coaches, people like that. And so we had Jim Cott on once, and Jim was wonderful. Jim's a great speaker, of course.
And he and Billy worked in the booth together for WPS.
What a booth that was.
Yes, what a booth that was.
And Jim, one quick story on Jim. He's like 20 years old, a kid. He's pitching up for my friend Jack McKeon up, in the minor leagues. And they wanted to, and this is another thing they don't do anymore. They don't stretch these guys out emotionally as well as physically to learn how to pitch. So as a young kid, McKeon loved him, made a bet with the GM that Jim Cott would make it. There we go. Jim Cott would make it to the majors before the prize rookie, the prize prospect that they had. Of course, Jim did it. But one of the stories that Jack told me, and Jim confirmed, of course, this is why Jim had him at his Hall of Fame. Jim was in big trouble, like seventh inning, bases loaded, no outs. McKeon comes out, spits a little tobacco juice on his shoe, and tells him, "You got into this, kid. Figure out how to get out of it." And,
I love that.
Isn't that great? That's and again, it's the minor leagues where you develop. And so Jim told all those stories on our podcast. After the podcast, he said, "Hey guys, I would love to join your network." So he does a podcast now himself. So we have Jim Cott, we have Jeff.
And what about Ball 9?
Ball 9, yes, Ball 9 allows me to get there because I can write my stories. Like the latest one on plastics, I thought back to the 1967 movie The Graduate. There it is.
There we go.
There's that great scene where he is told, his life is going 100 miles per hour, Dustin Hoffman, and the businessman comes out and says, "I got one word for you: plastics." And it's
So
like,
I have another question. Do you ever get writer's block?
you know what? If I do, I go for a walk, and then it goes away. And that's a good question too, because I didn't know how I wanted to intro what I wanted to say about today's game, and I was sleeping in the middle of the night, and I woke up and I thought of that scene. So I keep a notebook nearby me, and I went out to the kitchen and where the notebook was, and I wrote down the word plastics, and I looked up the scene the next day, and I took
do that too. I have a notepad right by my bedstand.
Exactly, and you need it, and so I changed plastics to athletes. That's what the 30 owners need to know. You need athletes now. So that I do all that at Ball 9. I was a couple of years ago in 2020 March. I got the call out of nowhere. I was still doing a great job with the Post. They decided to eliminate my position. The old eliminate my position. So instead of getting mad or anything like that, I said, okay, I'll take it with a grain of salt. And like a few weeks later, Chris Vitale called me, and he's the guy who founded Ball 9. And it's I'm not making money. It's not
doing
money.
what you love, and you know what?
Something I love.
And isn't that what we all want to do? And I just, I so enjoy talking to you, and I learned so much. And you inspire me. You make me want to love my job even more. I don't know how that's possible. But,
well, you keep doing this, Jill. Let me just say this real quick. You keep doing this because you're going to find what I did at Ball 9. All of a sudden, these people are coming to you. I have so many people after I write that send me notes that have been forgotten in the game, or maybe don't have the power they once had, or still in the game. I just had a GM send me a note just before I went in the air about, hey, thanks for mentioning my guy Sean Pender with the Reds, who is still the player development. So you're doing the same kind of thing, and so it's important to do that.
And how do we reach you, Kevin? I mean, is it through Ball 9, or what's the best way to reach you?
Well, I'm on Twitter a lot, unfortunately. I don't do it all the time, but I have fun with it. I don't take it too seriously, and it's AMBS_Kernan. And then you can also find me on Instagram and Ball 9 and Facebook, all those places where you find me. And again, I'm interactive. If you're a jerk, I don't deal with you. I never did. That's how I deal with it. But most people are super nice. I get a lot of story ideas from people. They tell me stuff or they connect me. When all of a sudden I'm writing about something that's totally different, and that's how it happens. And that's what makes a great story.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? Please come back on again. I mean, I think we should do a regular thing. Thank you, Kevin, and tell Anne thank you for sharing her husband with us today. And I look forward to meeting her too. And I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks, Jill. And actually, a shout out to my daughter Kelly, who's visiting this weekend.
Yes.
Longtime teacher, does a great job with kids. One final thing: don't be afraid to change in life. Kelly was a math teacher for 20 years. It got a little crazy after COVID. The kids have kind of lost their way a little bit. So you know what she did, Jill? And you'll love this. She just suddenly said, you know what? I want to change. So she she took some courses basically online and got a degree in agriculture. And she's teaching agriculture now. And she's like meeting with cows and kids. And
she loves it.
A lot of great things.
You can come and meet some of my horses.
There we go.
Thank you, Kevin. And have a wonderful night. Thank you for sharing.
Always a pleasure and good luck. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Once in your life, you find her, someone who turns